Hello and good evening. It'll be Tuesday morning for us when the leaders of the world's biggest militaries and economies meet virtually, but it is a much-watched event globally as it's the first time Joe Biden and Xi Jinping will be face-to-face as the leaders of their countries. They go back a long way, but the rivalries and competition of the present weigh heavily on the interpersonal dynamics of the past. We'll be talking about it on Newsnight tonight with our guests. I'm Gautam Roy. We'll also be talking about how the nation is celebrating tribal legacy and contributions today on the occasion of the birth anniversary of Bhagwan Birsa Munda, where Prime Minister Narendra Modi rolled out several schemes in Madhya Pradesh and a memorial park and museum in Jharkhand while marking the nation's first Janjatiya Gaurav Divas. But first, our headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi addresses the nation's first Janjatiya Gaurav Divas Mahasammelan in Bhopal on the occasion of the birth anniversary of Bhagwan Birsa Munda. Says it's the first time since independence that the tribal community is being honoured on such a big scale. Charges previous governments of completely neglecting tribals for decades, giving priority to selfish political ends. The PM launches several key schemes and programs for the welfare of tribals in Madhya Pradesh. Apart from rolling out Rashan Aapke Gram in Madhya Pradesh Sickle Cell Mission, the PM also lays the foundation stones for 50 Eklavya model residential schools nationwide. Further, the PM virtually inaugurates the Bhagwan Birsa Munda Smriti Udyan Sah Swatantrata Senani Sangrahalaya in Ranchi. Says the museum will bring forth the contributions of the heroes and heroines of the tribal community in the nation's freedom struggle, terms Bhagwan Birsa Munda as a deity established in our faith. The PM also dedicates to the nation the Rani Kamalapati railway station redeveloped on the PPP model in Bhopal. There will be airport-like facilities at the ISO-certified new Luke train station. Says the extent of impatience in planning new railway projects these days is the same as the impatience in executing them. The PM will deliver a major gift to the people of Uttar Pradesh on Tuesday. He'll unveil the 341-long Purvanchal Expressway built at a cost of 22,500 crore rupees. It will connect Lucknow with Ghazipur via Azamgarh and Mau. The PM will also bear witness to an air show by the Indian Air Force on an airstrip laid as part of the expressway. The Supreme Court pulls out the Delhi government over air pollution. Says if the contribution of stubble burning is only 10%, why not take action to curb vehicular pollution? Directs taking a decision by Tuesday evening related to contributing factors like vehicles, dust, construction and work from home. Warns Delhi government of an audit of its revenues and advertisement expenses. Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman holds a key meeting with chief ministers and state finance ministers. Has a discussion on the business environment in states, additional reforms and ways to attract more investments in different parts of the country. And all eyes are on the first virtual meeting between US President Joe Biden and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. The summit comes at a time when tensions have mounted between the world's biggest military and economic rivals over wide-ranging issues like Taiwan and trade. But they've also tried to work together on vital matters like climate change. Well, today is the birth anniversary of the country's biggest tribal icon, Bhagwan Birsa Munda. To mark the occasion, the nation celebrated its first Janjatiya Gaurav Divas, with the PM unveiling a slew of national and state initiatives in Madhya Pradesh and Jharkhand. First, the PM inaugurated Bhagwan Birsa Munda Memorial Udyan and Freedom Fighter Museum in Ranchi. He said the museum will become a living venue of our tribal culture, full of diversity, depicting the contribution of tribal heroes and heroines in the freedom struggle.
भगवान बिरसा ने समाज के लिए जीवन दिया, अपनी संस्कृति, अपने देश के लिए अपने प्राणों का परित्याग किया। इसलिए वो आज भी हमारी आस्था में, हमारी भावना में, हमारे भगवान के रूप में उपस्थित है। धरती आबा बहुत लंबे समय तक इस धरती पर नहीं रहे थे, लेकिन उन्होंने जीवन के छोटे से कालखंड में देश के लिए एक पूरा इतिहास लिख दिया, भारत की पीढ़ियों को दिशा दे दी।
Bhagwan Birsa Munda rewrote history, and the Modi government is now doing the same. Honouring the revered tribal freedom fighter Bhagwan Birsa Munda, the Modi government has declared that his birth anniversary on 15th of November will be celebrated as Janjatiya Gaurav Divas. To mark the occasion, Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated Bhagwan Birsa Munda Memorial Udyan cum Freedom Fighter Museum at Ranchi.
ये अवसर हमारी राष्ट्रीय आस्था का अवसर है। भारत की पुरातन आदिवासी संस्कृति के गौरव गान का अवसर है, और ये समय इस गौरव को भारत की आत्मा जिस जनजातीय समुदाय से ऊर्जा पाती है, उनके प्रति हमारे कर्तव्यों को एक नई ऊंचाई देने का भी है।
The Prime Minister has always emphasized the invaluable contribution of tribal communities, particularly their sacrifices in the cause of the Indian freedom struggle. It is this vision that has been captured in Bhagwan Birsa Munda Freedom Fighter Museum so that the coming generations can connect with their sacrifices for the country. The museum has been built in at the old central jail in Ranchi, where Bhagwan Birsa Munda had sacrificed his life. Apart from being a freedom fighter, Bhagwan Birsa Munda was also a great social reformer and environmentalist of his time.
आज जब हम देश के विकास में भागीदार बन रहे आदिवासी समाज को देखते हैं, दुनिया में पर्यावरण को लेकर अपने भारत को नेतृत्व करते हुए देखते हैं, तो हमें भगवान बिरसा मुंडा का चेहरा प्रत्यक्ष दिखाई देता है। उनका आशीर्वाद अपने सिर पर महसूस होता है।
Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that whether the movement is led by Bhagwan Birsa, Santhal Sangram, Khasi Sangram, Ahom Sangram in Northeast or Kol Sangram in Chota Nagpur region, the tribal sons and daughters of India challenged the British rule in every period. Bhagwan Birsa Munda's fight was also against the thinking that wanted to erase the identity of the tribal society in India.
वे आधुनिक शिक्षा के पक्षधर थे, वो बदलावों की वकालत करते थे। उन्होंने अपने ही समाज की कुरीतियों के, कमियों के खिलाफ बोलने का साहस भी दिखाया। अशिक्षा, नशा, भेदभाव, इन सब के खिलाफ उन्होंने अभियान चलाया, समाज के कितने ही युवाओं को जागरूक किया।
Remembering the former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee's contribution in the making of the state of Jharkhand, Prime Minister Modi said Atal ji was the first to form a separate tribal ministry and linked the tribal interests with the policies of the country. Paying homage to Bhagwan Birsa Munda, Prime Minister offered floral tributes to his statue in the Parliament House complex. 9 more such museums are being constructed in different parts of the country to preserve the history and identity of tribal communities from attacks in the name of modernity and to make the new generation aware of this heritage. This will not only help in preserving tribal culture and civilization, but will also boost heritage tourism in these areas. With Shailendra Mishra, Bureau Report, DD India.
And the Prime Minister also launched multiple key initiatives for the welfare of the Janjatiya, that is the tribal community. During Janjatiya Gaurav Divas Mahasammelan, he launched the Ration Aapke Gram scheme in Madhya Pradesh. He also launched the Madhya Pradesh Sickle Cell Mission and laid the foundations for 50 Eklavya model residential schools across the country. The PM hailed the tribal areas for their enthusiastic participation, which is an example for the rest of the country to follow.
A warm welcome for Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the first Janjatiya Gaurav Divas Mahasammelan. Recalling the legends associated with tribal leaders and their immense contributions in nation building, Prime Minister Modi hit out at previous governments for ignoring and belittling their history in the name of furthering modernity. He said that upliftment of tribal communities is a priority for his government. Prime Minister Modi launched the Ration Aapke Gram or Ration in Your Village scheme and the Madhya Pradesh Sickle Cell Mission. The first scheme is aimed at delivering the monthly quota of PDS ration to beneficiaries from tribal communities in their own villages every month, so that they don't have to travel to the fair price shop to collect it. The Sickle Cell Mission has been developed to screen and manage patients suffering from sickle cell anemia, thalassemia and to increase public awareness about these diseases.
राशन आपके ग्राम योजना हो या फिर मध्य प्रदेश सिकल सेल मिशन हो, ये दोनों कार्यक्रम आदिवासी समाज में स्वास्थ्य और पोषण को बेहतर बनाने में अहम भूमिका निभाएंगे.
Prime Minister Modi said that the tribal regions of the country have always been rich in terms of natural resources, but those who were in power earlier only exploited these areas.
आपके आशीर्वाद से आज उन 100 से अधिक जिलों में विकास की आकांक्षाओं को पूरा किया जा रहा है. आज जितनी भी कल्याणकारी योजनाएं केंद्र सरकार बना रही है, उनमें आदिवासी समाज बाहुल्य आकांक्षी जिलों को प्राथमिकता दी जा रही है.
Whether it is houses for the poor, toilets, free electricity or gas connections, schools, roads or free treatment, all these benefits are reaching tribal areas at the same pace as in the rest of the country. Talking of the massive COVID vaccination drive, Prime Minister hailed the tribal areas for their enthusiastic participation, which is an example for the rest of the country to follow.
दुनिया के पढ़े लिखे देशों में भी टीकाकरण को लेकर के सवालिया निशान लगाने की खबरें आती हैं, लेकिन मेरा आदिवासी भाई बहन टीकाकरण के महत्व को समझता भी है, स्वीकारता भी है और देश को बचाने में अपनी भूमिका अदा कर रहा है. इससे बड़ी समझदारी क्या होती है?
Prime Minister also laid the foundation stone of 50 Eklavya model residential schools across the country in states and union territories including Andhra Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Odisha, Tripura and Dadra and Nagar Haveli and Daman and Diu. Appointment letters to newly appointed teachers from particularly vulnerable tribal groups were also handed over in his presence. Prime Minister also visited an exhibition of products made by tribal self-help groups and a photo exhibition of martyrs and heroes of the freedom struggle from the tribal community of Madhya Pradesh. On his way to the venue of the Janjatiya Gaurav Divas Mahasammelan in Bhopal, Prime Minister Narendra Modi broke protocol, stopping to interact with over 150 tribal folk musicians who were part of an entourage to welcome him. With Rajesh Raj, Bureau Report, DD India.
So big recognition to the contribution of tribals to society today with the marking of the first Divas that really glorifies their history, the day that glorifies their history. And that brings up our In Focus, the first one of the night, PM's thrust on tribal welfare. And to talk about it, we have Professor A.B. Ota, Director and Special Secretary, Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes Research and Training Institutes, that's the SCSTRTI. And we also have Asit Gopal, Commissioner, National Scheduled Tribes Finance and Development Corporation, that's the NSTFDC, Ministry of Tribal Affairs. First, if I could ask you, Professor Ota, just explain to us what exactly has happened today and why did it happen at this juncture and not, decades ago?
You see, thank you for asking me this question. Bhagwan Birsa Munda is a tribal youth, in fact, who fought for the tribal, who fought for the freedom on behalf of the tribal community. And at the age of 25, he died. And the kind of inspiration he has given to the tribal fraternity, they took it forward, taking impetus from him. And this inspiration has made him, has given him the status of God, or Bhagwan. So many tribal freedom fighters have sacrificed their life for the India's freedom struggle. But one of the foremost frontline, tribal freedom fighter, who is considered as a god or as a cult, is Bhagwan Birsa Munda. To remember him and to, give identity to the tribal freedom fighters, this has been done. And I'm sure that this kind of, honor to a tribal freedom fighter who is regarded as a cult by the tribals will definitely inspire the tribals of even modern times to take up number of activities and contribute to the nation building. That is why, this day has been declared by Honorable Prime Minister as Janajatiya Gaurav Divas, so that the tribals will take pride in their leader and they will get, more this, their activities will gain momentum and they will go forward in the nation building.
Yes, certainly it'll go a long way in taking away the feeling of discrimination that still lingers, perhaps, although legally a lot has changed in the country and the way the people conduct themselves as well, one would think. But, a recognition of contributions of history is one part of, empowerment. The other is, of course, finance, giving the wherewithal for people if they want to do certain things to be able to do them. And as Commissioner NSTF DC, Mr. Gopal, I would want to ask you about that. What has the NSTF DC has been doing to ensure that tribals are also financially empowered, and to what extent have they been able to, get the benefit of that?
Let me tell you that National Scheduled Tribe Finance and Development Corporation is extending loans to scheduled tribe communities at a concessional rate through its state channelizing agencies. Since getting loan through banks is normally very difficult, and so many things, so many documentation also very tough. So the rejection rate for them is quite high.
Okay.
So that's why NSTFDC steps in. First of all, it provides concessional loans, and secondly, when its channelizing agencies are involved, then the documentation, etc., also is not as rigid as it is for, say, other nationalized banks. So the benefits are double. First of all, at a concessional rate, much less rate than what the nationalized banks charge, and secondly, informal, a very smooth procedure. But let me tell you that our intervention is very small as far as amount is concerned.
Okay.
It is very, very, very small. So we do intervene, but we have to think about how scheduled tribes gets benefit from regular banking system. That is very important. Without that, I think the impact won't be very much.
Okay. So what has been the impact so far?
Our intervention, I think, is limited to lending 350 crores per year to around 1 lakh beneficiaries. We are more helping also SHGs, because helping SHGs is like, if you help one SHG, it is equal to, say, 10. It is multiplied by 10 because there are 10 to 15 members in an SHG.
Yes.
So we are doing a lot in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana for women SHGs in particular. So that is a very important intervention from National Scheduled Tribe Finance and Development Corporation. And secondly, as a commissioner, I'm also looking after National Education Society for Tribal Students. So what you heard today is a foundation stone laying of 50 club and model learning system. That is, I think, a much more important intervention of Ministry of Tribal Affairs, because education is the key to development.
Certainly.
The next generation, it won't affect the present generation, but the next generation, they will definitely going to benefit from it. And Eklavya Model Residential Schools are providing education free of cost from 6 to 12 standards. Everything is free, boarding, lodging, everything is free. So that is, I think, a much more important intervention of Ministry of Tribal Affairs. It is going to give results in coming, say, next 5 to 10 years.
Certainly.
You would see the results.
So Professor
Already,
Ota, 50.
when it went from,
Yes.
Yeah.
Professor Ota, 50 more such schools will be in business very soon. One can expect another 3, maximum 3 years perhaps. Could you tell us what has been the impact so far of such initiatives in terms of the kind of education facilities that are there for tribals, and especially those areas, because access has remained an issue for, again, decades, and perhaps that has altogether changed now.
It is not 50. See, in the current scheme, 452 new.
I was asking Professor Ota. Sorry.
Yeah.
Professor Ota,
Yeah,
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, please go ahead.
You see, so far as education, EMRS is concerned, the EMRS is something, which is extremely beneficial for the tribal children. If you see, Eklavya Model Residential School is an initiative of government which has taken revamping mode from 2018-19. If you see today, there are 367 Eklavya Model Residential Schools located in remote tribal blocks of the country.
Yes.
And 639 Eklavya Model Residential Schools have been sanctioned by Government of India. Government of India has decided that by 2024 there will be 740 Eklavya Model Residential Schools in the country, mostly located in tribal blocks of the states and union territories. You will find these schools are really catering, a lot to the tribal quality enhancement of the tribal education. You see, these are all English medium schools, public schools kind, and they are residential in nature. You find that these children now have excelled in almost all fields, sports, education, and a host of things. In fact, my institute, Tribal Research Institute, had conducted a study on the evaluation of EMRS in the country. And we have come out with really very, very encouraging figures that the EMRS students have excelled, in getting into IITs, and they have really gone ahead, and when tracking is done, one finds that they are located in very, very high places.
Right. Tell us about, very quickly, about Adigrams as well, because that is one very standout of way of how different schemes have been launched, first by the government, and how they're being tracked as well.
You see, if you ask me about various kinds of schemes that you find with, which are implemented for the tribals, you will find there are 3 schemes under which the ministry finances 100% finance to the state governments. Grants under Article 275(1), special central assistance to tribal subplan areas, and third one, we have 75 particularly vulnerable tribal groups, special grant for the PVTJs. If you take it together, in 2021, for example, I'll tell you, Government of India has spent about 3,000 crores, and this money is used as critical gap filler. If you look at, livelihood initiatives, you'll find in terms of livelihood initiatives also, a lot of, initiatives have been done. You find 2,500 Bandhan Kendras have been done, where the self-help groups, each consisting of 300 members, are provided support so that the products they are making, they can be supported, and market linkages are also done. You will find in the country there are 141 outlets where these products are sold. So there's a direct market linkage. Even you find, Trifed, what they have done with these Bandhan Kendras, they have also tied up with Amazon, Flipkart, Snapdeal, and Gem so that these products which they are producing are getting a good market, good price, and they are. This is becoming a very good livelihood option. You can also find, few other things like minimum support price
Yes.
for the minor forest producers. Tribals earlier, what it was happening, they were selling their minor forest produce at a throwaway price.
Mm-hmm.
But now with the scheme of minimum support price for the minor forest produce, they are getting what's the price, which is really supporting them for the livelihood. Apart from the MFP, you also find non-MFP things are also getting supported.
Oh yes.
And value addition is also getting done.
Yes,
which is
Professor
supporting
Ota,
the
we're running out of
tribal
time. I do know that a lot has been done, even in the case of, say, the lockdown, tribals were given some sort of an exemption to be able to carry out their normal activities, accessing the forest, their forest rights. That was also something that was done at the initiative of the Tribal Affairs Ministry, because it got the exemption from the Home Ministry as well. And in general, in terms of the kind of schemes that the government has launched ever since 2014, the Modi government came to power for the first time. Financial inclusion included bank accounts. We know that a lot of access has been granted to tribals, so much so that an exploited, a perceived to be exploited segment of tribals who come to urban areas as domestic helps, they feel empowered as well, because they have bank accounts now. So a great amount of progress has been made in these recent years, and I'm sure there will be much more to follow. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Professor Ota as well as Asit Gopal. All right, now Prime Minister Narendra Modi also inaugurated and dedicated to the nation the redeveloped Rani Kamlapati railway station in Bhopal today. Rani Kamlapati railway station is the first world-class model station in the country and has all the facilities that are available at international airports. The PM also dedicated several other initiatives. He hailed the rail development work over the years. More in this report.
A welcome befitting a city known for its hospitality and warmth. As Prime Minister Modi made his way to Rani Kamlapati railway station, people showered petals at his cavalcade. The Modi government at the centre is making constant efforts to strengthen connectivity in the country, be it rail or road or air travel. Modern and developed infrastructure is being built. With focus on leveraging latest technologies to ensure connectivity, Prime Minister Modi dedicated the revamped Rani Kamlapati railway station to the nation. The redeveloped station is being built on a PPP model. The station is equipped with an eco-friendly building and modern world-class facilities. The station has also been developed as an integrated hub for various modes of transport.
मध्य प्रदेश में भोपाल में रानी कमलापति रेलवे स्टेशन के रूप में देश का पहला ISO सर्टिफाइड, देश का पहला PPP मॉडल आधारित रेलवे स्टेशन देश को समर्पित किया गया है.
The Prime Minister inspected the newly constructed Kamlapati railway station. The newly redeveloped station consists of water harvesting plant, solar panel with capacity of 600 kilowatt-hour, drinking water outlet facility. Apart from this, 100% coverage with CCTV cameras, centralized control room, childcare home centers, separate air-conditioned bedrooms for women, as well as Divyang toilets with ramps on each platform. The redeveloped station is named after the brave and fearless Queen Kamlapati of the Gond Kingdom.
किन्नौरगढ़ की रानी कमलापति जी का इससे नाम जुड़ने से इसका महत्व भी और बढ़ गया है. गोंडवाना के गौरव से आज भारतीय रेल का गौरव भी जुड़ गया है.
The Prime Minister also dedicated various railway projects and other initiatives and flagged off 2 new MEMU trains between Ujjain to Indore and Indore to Ujjain. Addressing the event, the Prime Minister said that Indian Railways is an example of how India is changing.
6-7 पहले तक जिसका भी पाला भारतीय रेल से पड़ता था तो वो भारतीय रेल को ही कोसते हुए हमेशा कुछ न कुछ बोलते हुए ज्यादा नजर आता था। जो सुविधाएं कभी एयरपोर्ट में मिला करती थी वो आज रेलवे स्टेशन में मिल रही है। वीआईपी कल्चर से ईपीआई यानी एवरी पर्सन इज इंपॉर्टेंट ईपीआई की तरफ ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन का यही मॉडल है।
Indian Railways is not only a means to cover distances, but it is also becoming an important medium to further the cultural and spiritual connect. And the Modi government is leaving no stone unturned to ensure that it keeps pace with the changing times. With Abhishek Singh in Bhopal, Bureau Report, DD India.
Now, many see them as global adversaries. Some call them rivals, while others call them competitors. A soon-to-take-place virtual meeting between US President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping may help define the relationship better in the days to come. The two sides recently came together over climate change in Glasgow to surprise everyone, but can they also throw up more surprises on issues of tension like Taiwan, trade and human rights? That's a question that's worth trillions.
The world's two biggest economies at opposite ends of what many call the new Cold War. But in international relations, conflict and resolution through agreement and cooperation is what keeps the world spinning. They've spoken twice over the phone ever since US President Joe Biden took office in January this year, but this will be their first face-to-face as leaders of their countries. Sources say there's no set agenda, but White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said on Friday, the two leaders will discuss ways to responsibly manage the competition between the United States and the PRC, as well as ways to work together where our interests align. There was standout example on day 13 of COP26 in Glasgow when the climate negotiators of the two countries surprised everyone with a US-China climate agreement. It can't be said whether more pleasant surprises are in store from the virtual summit meet, as there are many issues on which two sides have divergent views. The issue of the year-end deadline for China to purchase an additional $200 billion worth US products, including energy, agriculture, medical devices, and most likely to crop up. It's part of the trade deal signed during the Trump administration in 2019 intended to de-escalate the trade war between the two countries. But China has been slow to keep its end of the deal. It's estimated to be 40% short of the agreed purchase. Xi raised concerns about a return to Cold War rhetoric and tensions earlier this month. This was an apparent response to US efforts to rally allies to counter China's growing military and economic power. The US has increased its presence in the South China Sea and former AUKUS with UK and Australia to enable the latter to make nuclear-powered submarines. Beijing, meanwhile, has been building up its nuclear capability. The escalation on both sides will likely to be a topic of conversation. Beijing's power play over Taiwan has been a recent flashpoint. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken brought up China's military and economic pressure over Taiwan in a call ahead of the summit with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi. The Chinese foreign minister in turn warned that any support for Taiwanese independence would undermine peace in the Taiwan Strait. China has also been in a standoff with India in northern Ladakh over territorial claims since last year, when clashes took place between soldiers of both sides after decades, leading to multiple casualties on both sides. Biden is likely to bring up ongoing human rights concerns for activists in China, Hong Kong, and the treatment of Uyghurs. The United States is likely to seek assurances so that forced labor is not part of the supply chain process. Speculation is also on that President Xi could extend an invitation to his US counterpart for the Beijing Winter Olympics starting in February next year. Whether that happens or not could serve as a barometer to judge how the virtual meet went and what it could mean for the US-China relations going forward. Newsnight Desk, DD India.
And that brings up the second in focus of the evening, and that is all about how US-China leaders are going to be face-to-face very soon. And to talk about it this evening with us, we have Arun Kumar Singh, former Indian ambassador to the United States, and we also have Professor Harshvardhan Pant, Distinguished Fellow, Observer Research Foundation. Very good evening to both of you. First to you, Ambassador Singh, just tell us, what kind of expectations are really there, because there is a clear concerted effort on both sides perhaps to play down any expectations, for the first face-to-face meeting, although it's virtual, between President Joe Biden and President Xi.
I think what is important is the fact of the meeting itself. It's November and Joe Biden had become president in January, and they've not really had what can be called a bilateral meeting, either face-to-face or virtual, although they've spoken on the phone a couple of times. And you may remember that even President Trump, who otherwise had on occasion adopted a very hawkish posture on China, soon after taking over as president, had invited Xi to visit, and he hosted him in April, within a couple of months, in his resort in Mar-a-Lago in Florida.
Yes.
So it's a different equation that the US is trying to work out with China. There is tension in the relationship. The new administration has from time to time articulated that China is going to be their main challenge. And the US Defense Secretary has said that China is going to be the pacing challenge for the US in the coming decades. So they see China as their main economic, technological, and military challenge, although they see Russia as the main military challenge. So there is an effort in the US to try and define this relationship in a way that it works well for the US. They have felt that they have lost out in terms of economic competition. Manufacturing has shifted to China, so they want to reshore manufacturing to the US or to more trusted partners of the United States. So that effort is there. They want to deny China access to technologies where the US is in a lead. They want to push back on Chinese theft of intellectual property, on Chinese forced technology transfers from US companies in response to their getting market access in China. So that struggle is on. But the Biden administration, unlike the Trump administration, is trying to see if they can work out a coordinated policy with their allies and partners as far as response to China is concerned. Of course, the Chinese will push back on that because they believe that they have gained in strength. Their GDP has gained, the military strength has increased, and therefore they have a right to assert their preferences. And we see that in terms of their action in East China Sea, South China Sea, also along the line of control with India. So the US is currently engaged in an effort to push back on Chinese practices that they feel negatively impact on US interests, and yet find ways if they can cooperate with China where their interests align, as they did recently in the climate meeting in Glasgow.
Yes.
They came out with a joint statement, although there was not very much substantive in the joint statement itself, more than the symbolism of their being able to come together to issue a joint statement. US would like to work with China in the context of North Korea, work with China in the context of Iran, to see if they could deal with the issue of terrorism emanating from the Afghanistan area. So there are certain common areas, but there is a lot of competition.
Harshvardhan Pant, before I ask you about the dynamics of the two leaders, they go back a long way. Just tell us, what are the compulsions really that despite these kind of differences between the two sides, they still feel really compelled to come together to figure out a modus operandi of how they should conduct their relationship, where perhaps there is the overpowering need to avoid anything that might be precipitative?
There is the larger challenge whenever you have the two powers of the size and scale of US and China. They always have to find ways of engaging with each other. Because at the end of the day, in particular, if you look at US-China relationship, it is for both countries a very, very substantive economic relationship. Whatever the ambitions of the US may have been in the last few years, the economic intertwining between the two major powers is quite significant, and the decoupling, which many are proposing, and it is presumed that it has started, has not yet reached a tipping point where the two economies can actually look at each other in isolation from their own economic priorities. So I think if you look at a number of global challenges, now climate change, Ambassador Singh was pointing out, the joint statement, and there again, it was important because that is such a big priority for Biden administration. So therefore, it becomes incumbent to deal with China. And for China, I think at this particular point in time, when there is a degree of pushback across the globe, in the region in particular, they do need to continue to engage with the US so as to decrease that area of confrontation, which is expanding by the day. We can list off all the topics that were being discussed earlier. All of those issues are actually high up on the agenda in terms of confrontation. Yes. So I think it makes sense for them to engage with each other and to see where they can work. Whether it happens or not, I think I am pessimistic, but I think that's what the leadership and the diplomacy is all about, that they would like to see some resolution to at least some aspects of their confrontationist agenda.
Mm-hmm. And are there domestic reasons as well, Ambassador Singh, because both the leaders, in some respect or the other, Joe Biden's being saying politically, and Xi Jinping, although he's become even more powerful politically in China in recent days, but economically then, that is compelling them as well.
So, the domestic compulsion works both ways. So at the moment, US is going through high inflation. And there is an argument that when you're facing the problem of inflation, perhaps if you can reduce the cost of goods, lower the tariffs on China, maybe that will come down. But at the same time, there is a compulsion on the US president to take a more hawkish posture on China, because the argument is that it is China that has siphoned off US manufacturing by the kind of policies it has followed, by subsidizing industry, by forcing technology transfer.
Let me give an example.
Intellectual property.
Let me give an example. Can the US and China, if they come together, do something about the global oil prices as well?
Well, I think they may have some interest there, because I think both are being negatively impacted by the high oil prices. But as you know, US itself is a major producer of oil and energy. And of course, the overall energy market, global energy market, does impact the prices in the US. But the US exports energy. So we have to keep that in mind. So to that extent, there is a difference also in the Chinese and US interest. But aside from the energy dimension, I think there's a lot of geopolitics at stake in terms of how they define their relationship with the Gulf countries, how they define their relationship with Russia. And I don't think they would come together to really work on the oil price issue, keeping their other interests in mind.
Right. And Harshvardhan Pant, finally, a lot has been said and written about how far they go back, the kind of relationship that they've had in the past. But the realities of the present really are completely different from when they were, traveling together, and they were in Tibet together as well, perhaps.
Yes, I think, we really cannot think of the past as a guide anymore in terms of US-China relationship. It's a very different world. America is looking at China through a very different lens. Across the board, across party lines, there is a new consensus, and I think that has already been shown. The fact that this meeting is happening after at the very end of first year of Mr. Biden itself is indicative of the larger trend. And both sides, as I think your report was pointing out earlier, are also underscoring that there are real challenges in the relationship. So it's not going to be an easy conversation, nor is it going to be a conversation that is going to lead to some great headlines. But I think the point that both sides would be making is that who comes off as diplomatically more nimble at a time when this contestation seems to be the center pivot of global politics. And both sides are therefore positioning and pivoting around certain issues that they feel are important and that they feel should be tackled in that. So I think by and large, this is a new world out there as far as Mr. Biden is concerned. And for him to, all the indications of the last several months have been, and that he's not going to the past to see, as he's not looking at the past template. He's renewing a lot of the the hardline stance of Mr. Trump, but at the same time working to see if there is if there are aspects on which potentially he can build some sort of a relationship, and that would be, I think, the test of this first engagement.
But Ambassador Singh, one can't really rule out any further pleasant surprises at this stage? Can one, for example, even perhaps if the invitation for the Winter Olympics is extended, that in itself would be something of a nice takeaway?
Well, I would watch that carefully. I don't think President Xi would extend the invitation unless he was sure that Joe Biden would accept it. And right now there is a push in the US about taking a more cautious approach to the Winter Olympics in view of what they see as Chinese practices in Xinjiang. And the US has described Chinese practices there as genocide and the use of forced labor for production of goods. So at the moment there is a debate going on. And I think unless Xi has been assured that Joe Biden is likely to respond positively, my own senses is that he would hold back on extending any kind of a public invitation.
Yeah, this does seem a very outside possibility at this point, but we'll have to wait and see what the leaders can work out between them face to face across, of course, the great divide of the internet as well. But we'll have to wait and see what happens then. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Both of you. All right, the Supreme Court has directed the government to call an emergency meeting on Tuesday to take measures like stopping non-essential construction transport, power plants and implementing work from home. The top court has asked the centre to submit an action plan by Wednesday morning, when the case will be heard next. The Supreme Court also pulled up the Delhi government for giving lame excuses and warned that it would be constrained to order an audit inquiry into the money the government spent on popularity slogans seen across the capital.
Sharply pulling up the Delhi government for lame excuses and passing the buck and insisting on urgent measures rather than long-term goals, the Supreme Court said the capital's air pollution was a crisis. The Delhi government in an affidavit told the Supreme Court that it is ready to impose a complete lockdown to control air pollution, but added that such a step would be meaningful if it is implemented across the NCR areas in the neighbouring states. Solicitor General Tushar Mehta informed the Apex Court that several measures were contemplated in an emergency meeting held between officials of the Union Government and Delhi, Punjab and Haryana. He revealed that stubble burning is not a major cause of pollution and it contributes to only 10% of the air pollution. The affidavit filed by the centre says that 75% of the air pollution is due to three factors: industry, dust and transport. The Supreme Court further directed the centre to call for an emergency meeting on Tuesday and discuss the relevant issue and what orders can be passed to effectively control air pollution. It directed the centre and the NCR states to examine introducing work from home for employees. The Supreme Court warned the Delhi government of holding an audit on the revenue earned by the Kejriwal government and money being spent on popularity slogans. Meanwhile, the BJP launched a scathing attack on the AAP government, blaming it for the air pollution emergency that has arisen in the capital.
सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने सही वक्त पे इंटरवीन किया और अब अगला जो रिप्लाई आने वाला है दिल्ली के विज्ञापन मंत्री से वो ये आने वाला है एंड आई होप ये ना आए कि अब सुप्रीम कोर्ट भी बिकी हुई है, क्योंकि शर्म की बात है कि सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने यहाँ तक उनको बोला है और इन्होंने अपने एफिडेविट में सुप्रीम कोर्ट को ये बोला है कि हम सिर्फ ये जो दिल्ली की पोल्यूशन है सिर्फ 4% जो है वो स्टबल बर्निंग के थ्रू होती है। उसके बाद सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने इनको ये भी बोला है कि आप कितना रेवेन्यू जनरेट करते हैं और कितना आपने स्पेंड किए दिल्ली की एयर क्वालिटी को बेहतर करने के लिए, वो बताइए, नहीं तो ये ऑडिट कराएंगे। इससे खराब क्या चीज हो सकती है, इससे बेशर्मी क्या चीज हो सकती है।
दिल्ली की आम आदमी पार्टी की सरकार कुशासन का प्रतीक बन गई है, आम लोगों के जीवन से खिलवाड़ करना शुरू कर दिया। आज माननीय सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने जिस प्रकार की लताड़ लगाई है उसमें अगर जरा भी नैतिकता होती अरविंद केजरीवाल सरकार को तो वो अपने पद से इस्तीफा दे चुके होते।
The air quality in Delhi, often ranked the world's most polluted capital, has declined due to crop stubble burning, emissions from transport, coal-fired plants outside the city and other industries, as well as open garbage burning and dust. Bureau Report, DD India.
Prime Minister Modi will be visiting Uttar Pradesh tomorrow, that's the 16th of November, and he will inaugurate Purvanchal Expressway at Karwal Kheri in Sultanpur district around 1:30 in the afternoon. After the inauguration, the PM will also witness an air show by the Indian Air Force on the 3.2 km long airstrip constructed on the expressway in Sultanpur district to enable landing and takeoff of IAF fighter planes in case of any emergency. The Purvanchal Expressway is 341 kilometers long. It starts from Chaudhsarai village, which is in Lucknow district, located on Lucknow Sultanpur Road, NH 731, and ends at village Haidaria, located on National Highway number 31, which is 18 kilometers east of UP-Bihar border. The expressway is 6-lane wide, which can be expanded to 8 lanes in the future. Constructed at an estimated cost of about 22,500 crore rupees, the Purvanchal Expressway is going to give a boost to the economic development of eastern part of Uttar Pradesh, especially the districts of Lucknow, Barabanki, Amethi, Ayodhya, Sultanpur, Ambedkar Nagar, Azamgarh, and Gazipur. We're taking you live now across to a briefing by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Take a look.
Some finance ministers were also represented by other ministers holding different portfolios, but I'm grateful to all the states who participated and gave their views. There is a very detailed press release which is being put out. I think nearly 19 states chief ministers had participated. No, sorry, 15 chief ministers participated, 15, not 19. Lieutenant Governor of Jammu and Kashmir, Deputy Chief Minister of 3 states, and ministers, finance ministers of the rest of them. I've listed it out in the press release, so you'll get the names. The context of the meeting was that after the second wave, we are seeing a robust growth. However, it's also a time when where we are looking at ways in which we need to sustain the growth, take it as close as possible to a double-digit growth, and for which both the center and the states will have to work together. So this meeting was essentially to seek states and their ideas on how they want this to be taken further, because in most of the issues related to investment, development, and also for manufacturing and taking business activities, it is the states who are doing it from the forefront. The support from the center is always there, but we also wanted to make sure that states and their understanding of how they would want to go forward should be heard, and that is the reason this meeting was called. And therefore, I must put it up front that we've had very, very key ideas coming from states. There were also generic requests which were posed. I'm not going through each of the ideas. We've listed it out for you, bullet points of each of the suggestions which have come. Like one of the examples that I like to take is also the way in which some of the states have given approvals and for projects. They were looking for better dispute resolution mechanisms, post the award of contracts, enhancing road connectivity. Some of the Northeast states came up with specific suggestions of immediate job creation for their states, and state-specific international trade policies for the Northeast. So I've listed it out. The need for a policy for offshore wind energy generation was highlighted by some states. So it is a very useful session where clearly the way in which we want to move forward is to ensure that the understanding that states have about their way of wanting to move forward post a pandemic, with the people of India showing greater aspiration to want to come out of the pandemic and clearly push towards better and speedier growth. It was just a timely meeting which we've had with the states, and the detailed notes have been taken of the oral speaking in content of the ministers, but of course we've requested each one of them to send their written note as well. One of the things which I'll make my opening intervention very brief. One of the things which states have been talking about is the way in which this year we have front-loaded many of the dues which have to go to the states. That has been recognized. And also there was at least a few of them kept saying that the capital expenditure money that was given to them, almost like a grant, but for the 50 years which they can use interest-free and for them to return 50 years later, has been well received. Many of the states very openly said that they would want the scheme to be continued because the emphasis is on capital expenditure. Unless states and center put the money for infrastructure building, the ripple effects for promoting better and speedier growth will be not as desirable as we wish to have it. And therefore that expenditure is absolutely necessary, and many of them have been stating that. You are aware that the GST compensation which was agreed upon for this entire year has already been given even by early November. Similarly, today some of the CMs requested that for increasing the state's capital expenditure, it would really be helpful for them to get a part of the tax devolution for the current financial year also. In a sense, if it can be front-loaded, it will be helpful. There and then, of course, I've directed the Finance Secretary, who's also taking care of the expenditure, to do this immediately so that this being a very exceptional year, states will not be short of money in their hands when all of us are pushing forward with the infrastructure expenditure to be taken up by them. So I have suggested to the Finance Secretary that in this month, to be specific, on 22nd November, normally devolution money goes on the 20th. 20th and 21st, I understand, is a weekend, and therefore on the 22nd, instead of the normal monthly installment of devolution amount, which is a total of 47,541 crores, I've asked Finance Secretary to release another 47,541 crore, so a total of 95,082 crores will be given to the states on November 22nd, which means other than the amount due in November of devolution, one more installment will be given together on 22nd November. So with that, the desire of the states to have some more money in their hands so that they can easily consider spending it for infrastructure creation would help. Just in case you want any numbers about how much will be given to each of the states during this period, we can share the table with you, and you will get to know about the amounts. So thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We will now take some questions. 1 to 5.
Well, there you heard the Union Finance Minister, that's Nirmala Sitharaman, after consultation with states. A lot of chief ministers there, at least 15 of them, and 3 deputy CMs, apart from the LG of Jammu and Kashmir as well. She had extensive consultations about how to ensure the growth momentum of the country. We're seeing some momentum these days after the second wave of the COVID pandemic, how it should be, how it can be, the steps that can be taken to maintain it. And one big announcement that came out of it was that instead of the usual devolution amount that is given to states every month from the central taxes, which amounts to about 47,000 crores each month, another installment will be given in advance, so around 95,082 crore rupees will be given, so that they can use the money as far as infrastructure, boosting of infrastructure is concerned. There are a lot of things that the states want to do to ensure that this growth momentum is maintained, and that is something that is going to happen on the 22nd of November. Let's go back to that briefing.
Arrangements for it. Over and above that, at least 2 states wanted specifically an increase because they felt that their situation being what it is, they would want to have that flexibility given to them unconditionally. If I can recall, one was Madhya Pradesh, the other one was Sikkim.
Number 11.
Ma'am, I just wanted to understand the devolution, this Siddharth. Ma'am, just wanted to understand the devolution part, how much would have been transferred so far, and what is the modalities that have been worked out now? And also, just another this thing, are there, so ma'am, was higher capex, higher infra spend one of the key issues for today's deliberations?
Second point, I'll ask Finance Secretary to give you the details of the devolution. Today's meeting was more to understand the state's understanding of where they are, what is the kind of perspective they have. All of them do appreciate that spending on infrastructure is absolutely well taken, and that is why you saw me telling you earlier that some states preferred that 50-year interest-free loan so that they can take upon themselves some of the projects, and therefore that money comes off handy. So today's meeting was to understand from the states what their perspective is, 2, where do they have their requirements in terms of infrastructure spending, how far have they achieved what was announced earlier, and what is it that they expect to do in the forthcoming months, with a larger interest of growing well, and looking at a good, number of GDP growth. So that was the broader agenda of the meeting. On the devolution, of course,
states are entitled to a particular percentage of central taxes. The aggregate is 41, and it's divided among the states as decided by the Finance Commission. Typically, the share of central taxes is devolved in 14 installments in a financial year. The use of a stable installment is actually very beneficial to the states in most situations because it gives predictability for them for their cash flow. And it is the normal practice over many decades that the adjustment between the budget estimate and the revised estimate is done in the month of March, when it may either go up or it may go down. So the last 3 installments in March, the adjustment is made, but the first few installments are given on the same basis. This year, as per Honorable Finance Minister's directions, what she just mentioned, in the month of November, instead of devolving 1 installment out of the 14, which is what we would normally devolve, and 1 installment currently, based on the budget estimate, is 47,541 crores. Instead, we are going to give 2 installments in the month of November. So these 2 installments together amount to 95,082 crores. So it gives the devolution several months in advance of when it would normally be given. And of course, the adjustment between RE and BE will happen in the month of March, but this is an advance release which is being made.
If you just want to understand the extent, you may name any state you want instead of me picking up. Without this new instruction, let us say Arunachal Pradesh would have had 835 crores being given to them on November 20th. This month is November 22nd. Now they will get 835 plus another 835. So if you go on like that, Andhra Pradesh gets 1923.98 crores. They will now get another 1923.98. So like that, everyone gets this installment plus 1 more installment. That would have otherwise come only in March. We are up front loading it even now. Any other state that you would want to know? Kerala, for instance, 915.16 crore. They would get another 91 5.16 crore. Madhya Pradesh, 3731.96 crores is what they would have got on November 20th. Now this month, November 22nd, they will get another 3731.96 this month itself, instead of waiting till March. And December will get its December 20th share, January, February, and so on. That's what is being provided as an upfront facility. It's their money, but they would have got it in March, we're giving it now. The 3 installments of March, one of them is coming now. Better cash flow?
I think contrary to popular impression, I mean, it is, yes, that is, of course, makes it easier to do, but contrary to popular impressions, most of the states are not in negative cash flow. In fact, state cash balances are very high at the moment, with very few exceptions. So as of October 30th, for instance, 2.66 lakh crores of positive cash balance among the states. And out of 29 states plus the Union Territory of J&K, as on October 30th, only 4 had a negative cash balance. The rest collectively had a positive cash balance of 2.66 lakh crores. So it is not as if most of the states are in cash trouble, but this would enable them to front load some of their capital expenditure. They made a request and therefore this has been passed on. The figures which I just now gave you are October 30th, that is the balance. The 4 states are, I think, Manipur, I'm sorry, I don't have the, I think it's Manipur, Andhra Pradesh, and 2 more, which I don't remember the last 2. Sikkim probably, but I'm not sure, ma'am. No.
Number 5.
You can check with whoever told you.
Good evening, ma'am. Since the budget is also approaching, I'd like to know if states had any kind of special request that the center should consider in terms of allocation. And pardon me for my second question, but I'd really like to ask if there were any discussions or points of concern shared on cryptocurrency with state FinMins or CMs today.
Not one state spoke about cryptocurrency. Not one state spoke about cryptocurrency today. In general, there were a lot of observations, no particular thing about in the budget, this much allocation for that particular thing. None of that. There were a lot of discussion in general about so many things each state felt they wanted to say.
Number 53.
मैम, जो आज आपने बोला 15 स्टेट्स थे इस मीटिंग में, उसमें से कितने स्टेट्स अपोजिशन के थे? और
क्या आपके पहले लाइन रिपीट करिए।
आपने बोला कि आज की मीटिंग में 15 स्टेट्स के चीफ मिनिस्टर्स थे।
हाँ जी।
तो इसमें से कितने चीफ मिनिस्टर जो है अपोजिशन रूल्ड स्टेट्स के थे और कितने ऐसे मुद्दे उठे जो इस मीटिंग के बाद उसको कितने टाइम में हल हो जाएंगे? कितने ऐसे मुद्दे उठे जो इश्यूज उठे होंगे वो कब तक सॉल्व हो जाएंगे और अगली मीटिंग कब होगी मैम?
ये बहुत ही रेयर है सिचुएशन, इसीलिए इस मीटिंग इस बार हुआ है, इससे पहले कभी नहीं हुआ और इसका ऐसे टाइमलाइन भी नहीं है। हम इस संदर्भ में क्योंकि रिवाइवल हो रही है स्टिमुलस देने के कारण और हर स्टेट का उनके अपने अपने मन में सोच विचार है, स्टिमुलस को कैसे सस्टेन करें उसके ऊपर चर्चा करने के लिए ये मीटिंग रेयर वन ऑफ मीटिंग है। ये नहीं है कि बार बार ऐसे मीटिंग होगा, शायद आवश्यकता भी इतना नहीं हो सकता है। चीफ मिनिस्टर्स कितने, मतलब 15 में से कितने ऑपोजिशन के, मैं बात बोल रही हूँ आपको, मैं पूरे लिस्ट पढ़ लेती हूँ, आप सोच लीजिए आपको मालूम होगा। असम चीफ मिनिस्टर, छत्तीसगढ़ चीफ मिनिस्टर, गोवा, हरियाणा, हिमाचल प्रदेश, कर्नाटका, मध्य प्रदेश, मणिपुर, मेघालय, मिजोरम, नागालैंड, पुदुचेरी, सिक्किम, त्रिपुरा एंड उत्तर प्रदेश चीफ मिनिस्टर्स। राजस्थान, क्योंकि आप स्पेसिफिकली नाम लिए या विपक्ष वाले स्टेट्स के नाम लिए, उसमें राजस्थान के वित्त मंत्री जी आए थे और दिल्ली के डिप्टी सीएम आए थे जो वित्त मंत्री भी हैं। फिर आंध्र प्रदेश, गुजरात, केरला, ओडिशा, पंजाब, राजस्थान, तमिलनाडु, तेलंगाना, उत्तराखंड और वेस्ट बंगाल के अपने अपने वित्त मंत्री लोग जी पार्टिसिपेट किए। नहीं, मुद्दा उठाया, मगर अच्छा हुआ आपने उस विषय को जिक्र कर रहे हैं। इसमें मैं आपके द्वारा भी एक गलत फहमी को दूर करना चाह रही हूँ। Somanathan, do you want to explain it?
No, a question was, I mean, there seems to be some doubt about the reduction of 10 rupees and 5 rupees. I just want to make it clear. The entire reduction of 5 rupees and 10 rupees has been in the non-shareable portion of excise, which means that the entire reduction is borne by the central government. And no part of this excise duty is part of the 41% which is shared with the states. So the entire reduction of 10 rupees and of 5 rupees is a revenue loss to the central government, and there is no loss of devolution to any state government through the reduction of 10 rupees and 5 rupees, which was done recently.
Number 9.
Ma'am, I have a supplement question on this thing. Following the excise duty cut early this month, some 25 states have cut their VATs, but there are 10 states, mostly opposition states, they have not cut. So now the blame game, the politics over the petrol and diesel prices have shifted to state level. For example, Punjab has not cut. Punjab has cut because there is an election. But other Congress-ruled states like Chhattisgarh and Rajasthan, they have not cut. In Maharashtra and in Jharkhand, they have not cut. Adhir Ranjan Chaudhary has written a letter to West Bengal Chief Minister appealing that she should consider this thing. During the UPA tenure, there was an option before GST that in such cases where states do not pass or there is no commensurate cut, there was a category of special goods and LPG was brought into that. So uniform 4% VAT was there. That option is not there after GST. So will you consider something or will you appeal to them? Because they, people of these 10 states, they are at the mercy of their state governments and there is no cut.
Appeal that states also come along to do something has been already made. But if some states don't want to do it, it's for their citizens who voted for that government to ask. We can only appeal, and I have appealed long back.
What more ways to delete under GST?
GST, already petroleum products are in the GST. The necessary amendment has already been made. However, unless the GST Council agrees on the rate, what is the rate? 5%, 10, 12%, 18%, 28%? कुछ तो तय करने के बाद ही GST का implementation लागू होगा. सिर्फ कानून में पेट्रोल को ले आए, मगर बिना रेट कैसे इंप्लीमेंट करेंगे? इसीलिए जीएसटी में ऑलरेडी है पेट्रोलियम प्रोडक्ट्स. जब तक जीएसटी काउंसिल उसका रेट तय नहीं करता, तब तक वो लागू नहीं हो पाएगा.
मैं लक्ष्मण CNBC आवाज से. कई सारी सरकारी कंपनियां हैं जिसमें सेंटर के साथ साथ स्टेट का भी स्टेक यहाँ पे है, और कई सारी कंपनियों के एसेट भी स्टेट के पास हैं. चूंकि हम केंद्र सरकार की तरफ से एसेट मोनेटाइजेशन और स्ट्रेटेजिक डाइवेस्टमेंट पर जोर है, तो क्या इस मुद्दे पर राज्यों से अपील की गई या फिर कोई चर्चा हुई कि राज्य अपनी तरफ से भी कोऑपरेशन बढ़ाएं?
हाँ, एक आध स्टेट्स ने ये भी कहा कि अगर पब्लिक सेक्टर अंडरटेकिंग्स है उनके यहाँ और उनके पास सरप्लस जमीन है, उसको स्टेट्स को दी जाए, जिससे स्टेट्स उसमें भी खर्च करके कुछ प्रोजेक्ट्स कर सकते हैं या कुछ इंडस्ट्री पार्क लगा सकते हैं. ऐसे सो उसके ऊपर भी विचार करने के लिए उनसे सुझाव आया है.
70.
और हमने भी ये याद दिलाए कि मोनेटाइजेशन पाइपलाइन तो अभी सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट का प्रोजेक्ट्स के ऊपर मोनेटाइजेशन का पाइपलाइन लिस्ट अनाउंस किया गया। अगर हमने शायद सेकेंड वेव के बाद स्टेट्स को ये भी इंसेंटिवाइज किए कि आप कुछ आगे आकर के डिसइन्वेस्टमेंट करोगे तो हम स्टेट्स सेंटर के तरफ भी आपको इंसेंटिव करने के लिए एक इतना करने में 20-30%, इतना करने में 50%, इतना करने में 100% इक्वल शेयर हम देंगे, ऐसे अनाउंसमेंट भी किए हैं, उसको भी याद दिलाए।
Ma'am, Shubham from Informis Media. Ma'am, is it possible to get a sense on what is the aggregate capex target for states in FY22 and how much of that target has been met till date?
I thought there was a news item sometime today or yesterday.
I do not have the figures of the aggregate with me. It has been communicated to each state. Broadly, it is based on the following methodology, that there is a base level of capital expenditure in 2018-19. There is an estimated growth to 2019-20. And then there is an assumption that 75% of the additional borrowing that is tied to capex, the 0.5, must be spent on incremental capital expenditure. So that is how the target is calculated. There is a base, then there is an extra borrowing. So to earn that extra borrowing, 75% of that extra borrowing has to be spent on capital expenditure. So this is a state-specific target. We have given you the figures of those states which have achieved it. I don't have with me the figures for the states who have not. But many states have achieved it, and in today's meeting, several indicated that they would also be meeting those targets. And today's additional installment of release of cash is also to help them to push the cash into capital expenditure faster than if it were released in its normal course. Most of them appear, I mean, the sense I got from the meeting is most of them are likely to meet their capital expenditure.
I just want to give you this. States were requested to take the capex, and 11 states, Andhra Pradesh, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Haryana, Kerala, Madhya Pradesh, Manipur, Meghalaya, Nagaland, Rajasthan, and Uttarakhand have achieved the target set by Ministry of Finance for capital expenditure in the first quarter. So then the additional borrowing permission was given to them. So I've given you first quarter. Of course, it's progressing in a similar fashion. So states are definitely moving firmly on capital expenditure, and also thereby are in a position to borrow more.
81.
Ma'am, Amrish from Z Business. प्रोजेक्ट डिस्प्यूट्स को लेकर एक मैकेनिज्म डिस्कस हुआ, तो किस तरह के डिस्प्यूट्स हैं और क्या मैकेनिज्म होगा, एक सवाल। दूसरा, इंश्योरेंस पर जीएसटी कम करने को लेकर बहुत दिनों से डिमांड थी, तो क्या इस पर कुछ स्टेट्स से बातचीत हो रही है?
किसके ऊपर?
इंश्योरेंस।
इंश्योरेंस नहीं, पहला ये डिस्प्यूट रेजोल्यूशन मैकेनिज्म को स्ट्रेंथन करने का एक सुझाव आया है। फिर ये मॉडल कंसेशन एग्रीमेंट्स, उसके ऊपर भी, जो कि इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर के विषय में उपयोग में आता है, पर्टिकुलरली पीपीपी इकोसिस्टम में कैसे उपयोग करना, इसका मॉडल कानून है। इस संदर्भ में ये डिस्प्यूट रेजोल्यूशन को स्ट्रेंथन करने का एक सुझाव आया। नहीं, इंश्योरेंस के ऊपर नथिंग इन पर्टिकुलर।
Just one more statistic, ma'am, if I may share. You had asked on capital expenditure. I do have some figure which says that between April and September of this financial year, the capital expenditure of 20 states for which the data is available has shown an increase of 79% on the previous year. Of course, that was a bad year, so it's a 79% increase, and it's 23% higher than in 1920, which was the pre-pandemic year. So it's 79% higher than the pandemic year and 23% higher than the non-pandemic year. So that is an indication of the aggregate level of growth in capital expenditure, which has been achieved through all these mechanisms.
Thank you, ma'am. With your permission, we'll close the press conference now. Thank you very much, friends.
There you saw the live press conference by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman after that consultation and the discussion with a lot of the chief ministers of different states and how they're getting some money in advance as far as their tax devolutions are concerned. Double, in fact, the amount that is meant to go towards the end of November on the 22nd, about over, in fact, 90,000 crore rupees. And there were other issues that were also taken up in the Q&A, and one of those was about whether the 5 and 10 rupees reduction in the tax on fuel, that is petrol and diesel, is that going to impact the share of states as well? And it was clearly made evident over there that it's not, it's completely from the centre's share. And there were a lot of other questions that were asked about states that have met their capex targets as well, and whether they get the benefit that they can then access loans. And the government is saying that I think the number that was there was for 7 states, and in today's discussions it was indicated that some other states will also meet those Q2 targets. That's about it for the moment as far as Newsnight is concerned. The latest always continues over here in DD India, so stay tuned.